Christian parenting.
Here's a discussion I wish I'd had at least a decade ago. Author Drew Dyck is back with me once again, and today we are going to discuss cultivating self-control in our children. Super needed subject. You're going to get a lot out of today's episode.
The goal for them, hey, we want you to cultivate these virtues in your life, that it's good to say no to something, even when it's hard. It's good to do hard things and reward them when they do those things. For a lot of people, a lot of parents, it's not even really on their radar that self-control is a virtue. They think it's kind of Victorian and repressive, and I just want to release my child's creativity. But they're neglecting something, I think, that's very important.
Hey, my name is Jay Holland, and this is Let's Parent on Purpose. It's a podcast to help you thrive and not just survive your parenting years. Each week, I'll bring you an insight or an interview that will help strengthen your marriage, your family, or your personal walk with Jesus. And if you find it helpful, I encourage you to subscribe, share it with your friends, and you're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find all kinds of past articles, issues, and resources to help your family. Hey, I'm super encouraged that you keep coming back to Let's Parent on Purpose and making that intentional investment in your personal walk with Jesus, in your marriage, and in your parenting. And this is a conversation that can go so far in helping you over the long term with the parenting of your kids. Author Drew Dyck is back with me. He was here last week. If you didn't catch that episode, 100% I recommend you listen to it. Although you can listen to this one and then go back. You don't have to listen to these in order. Drew is the editor at Moody Publishers, the former managing editor of Leadership Journal. His work has been featured in USA Today, The Huffington Post, Christianity Today, and CNN.com. Drew's the author of Generation X Christian, Yawning at Tigers, and the book that turned me on to him, Your Future Self Will Thank You, Secrets to Self-Control from the Bible and Brain Science. I highly recommend. He lives with his wife Grace and their 3 children near Portland, Oregon. I've got the links in my show notes of how to contact him at drewdyck.com or on Twitter. And today is just one of those conversations, having read his book, having talked with him about willpower and self-control, I just really wondered, how do we now take these principles and try to apply them to our own little rugrats? How do you help encourage self-control and willpower in somebody that maybe hasn't quite figured out that it's a benefit to them? They want instantaneous gratification, and you want them to be helpful human beings. So this conversation is not only interesting, it's very applicable, and we talk about a lot of things, and then right towards the end of it, we go back in and summarize just some very practical, tangible ways that you can work towards developing self-controlling your kids. This will help them with school, this will help them with chores, this will help them hopefully not stab one another when they get into a fight. And I know these are the things that you're struggling with because we talk about them, you email me back and forth, and this is a specific episode to help in those. If you find it helpful, I encourage you share it with somebody else that you know would benefit. And I just appreciate you, praying that you have a great week and that this episode particularly is something tangible and practical that you can see something change in your house because you invested the time to listen to it. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Drew Dyck. Drew, welcome back to Let's Parent on Purpose. This is a pretty big deal, back-to-back episodes. That doesn't happen much, but you've got a topic that really intrigues me. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I am honored to be a repeat guest. I'm going to try not to let it go to my head.
All right, do what you can.
Like I'm an elite company, but yes, I'll try to remain.
I assume that from last week to this week, you have so many hordes of people who have found you and are now camping out on your lawn for your wisdom and celebrity that you've probably had to go with a fake name by the time this is introduced. But
it's tough. Yeah, I've got some sunglasses, a phony beard, and so when I leave my house, they don't recognize me.
Yeah. So, and I do. If somebody's just joining in, highly encourage you. You can listen to these out of order, but absolutely listen to our conversation on the brain science and Bible behind willpower and self-control. But here's one where perhaps there's even a little bit more desperation from the moms and dads on we just need some wisdom. And that's just the subject of cultivating self-control in our kids. And Drew, I'm thinking about the different. I did an exercise at the end of this year where I emailed out a lot of my listeners and just asked, what are your pain points? What are the things that you're challenged about? Sibling rivalry, getting kids to mind, getting them to listen, beating a dead horse over and over again. And I feel like a lot of them just kind of center around this topic of how do you develop self-control in somebody that isn't really developed altogether. Let's just start out. Maybe we didn't talk about this last time. Give us your street cred. How many kids do you have? What are their ages and how perfect are they?
Yes. I don't know if this will help my parenting street cred or not. We only have 3. So, it's, in our neighborhood, we live in a predominantly Russian neighborhood. They tend to have very large families. So we got someone down the street that's got 10 and they look at us like, we're amateurs. So anyway, we have 3, a son who is 9, Athanasius. That's quite a mouthful, but usually we call him Athan. And then I have a daughter who is 6. And then we had a surprise kind of caboose who we're very grateful for, Sophia, who is 2. Her self-control is not great. It's all about me at this stage for some reason. So yeah, that's the street cred. And then, of course, like a lot of listeners, I'm sure, our life has gotten a little more difficult during the whole pandemic because we became accidental homeschoolers when the school shut down. Yeah, we thought about doing the Zoom stuff, and staying connected with the school, but then we realized my wife had the luxury of not having a job right now and was able to homeschool them. And so that has been a joy and an absolute terrifying struggle. And I'll tell you why, and I'm going to ruin all my credibility right now, is because teaching them the information, that's not so bad, okay? That's all right. It's the behavioral issues. Yeah. So I'll be in the living room, and Mary is taking off all her clothes, and she's lying on the floor and having a fit. And I go, would you do this if you were at school in a classroom? Probably not. But somehow when it comes to being at home and mom's the teacher, it's a little tougher. So yes, we are in the thick of it. Hopefully that bolsters my credibility. Yeah.
Dude, we just want to know that you're in the trenches and somewhat miserable like we are in here too. So last week we talked about the fact that willpower, science has basically shown that willpower is like a muscle. You only have so much of it, and when you've exhausted it for one thing, it's not really there for the other. And I'm just thinking about children who, from 1 to 5, they're learning everything, from brand new. And then you start to get into your older kids, elementary through middle and high school, and still the amount of things that are being thrown at them that whole time. And I know their brains are sponges, but it makes sense why there might be a more of a lack of self-control because there's so much other stuff being thrown at them. Does willpower work differently in children than adults?
I haven't looked at it too specifically as far as the research on children, but I will say this. I mean, almost by definition, the ability. Some people define maturity as the ability to delay gratification, right? By definition, children are people for whom willpower, self-control, delaying gratification is a work in progress. And if you're a parent, you know that, right? Because you're kind of going, why can't you clean your room? It's simple or this. But like you said, they got 1,000 things coming at them. This is all brand new to them. To a 5-year-old, the world is still quite a mystery and they're learning all the rules and they have strong impulses that they need to learn to curb, hopefully with our help. But it's a real uphill battle. So, I mean, the first thing I'd say, there is a knowledge component to this. One thing that we've really tried to instill in our kids is the value of self-control, of delaying gratification. You've probably heard of the marshmallow experiment. I'll rehash it very briefly.
Vaguely remember that. Let me know about it.
Yeah, this is like the 1960s Stanford experiment. What they did, it's kind of a cruel test in a way, but they got all these preschoolers, 3 and 4-year-olds, to participate in this experiment. And what they would do is they would put like a little kid in a room with a table that had like one marshmallow on it. And they'd say, you can eat the marshmallow, but if you wait 20 minutes, you'll get two marshmallows. So they were testing their ability to delay gratification. Now, as you can imagine, especially with the younger ones, they'd stuff the marshmallow in their mouth right away. Some would hold out for 5 minutes or 10. Most caved before the 20 minutes was up. Well, that was interesting. They kind of charted their ability to do that. But the really interesting findings actually came later and by accident, because the lead researcher on that study, he had daughters that were the same age as the participants. And as they got older, middle school, high school, he started to hear rumors or, kind of the gossip about their friends, many of whom had participated in the study. And he noticed that the ones who didn't do so hot at delaying gratification were getting into trouble at school, maybe experimenting with drugs and alcohol, certain antisocial behaviors. So they got all these people back. They traced them right through high school, college, into adulthood. And it kind of revolutionized the field of at least that part of social science, because what they found was that self-control, even at that early age, was pretty highly predictive of later life outcomes, even when it came to SAT scores and the health of people's relationships. And up until that point, the kind of dominant thinking, and I think it still is in many ways, is that self-esteem is what matters, right? If we just pump kids up, like, oh, you're the best at everything, you're so incredible, you're so beautiful, you're so talented, that they will kind of magically rise and do better in life and have more self-control and willpower. But that's been a bust. That's been a bust. You see those studies where it's like, okay, kids in the United States rank like, 30th in the world in math, but they're like first in their confidence about their math abilities, right? So you get these hilarious disparities. And that's a direct result of the whole self-esteem movement, which is largely garbage. Now, listen, you want kids to feel good about themselves, but that focus is a little out of whack. Really, you need to focus just as much, if not more, on developing self-control. Now, having said all that, I think, obviously the best place to start is scripture. So even teaching your kids verses like out of Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit, right? And kind of making those the goal for them. Hey, we want you, of course, with God's empowerment, with God's help, to cultivate these virtues in your life. That it's good to say no to something, even when it's hard. It's good to do hard things and reward them when they do those things. So that's the goal, at least, because for a lot of people, a lot of parents, it's not even on the radar. It's not even really on their radar that self-control is a virtue. They think it's kind of Victorian and repressive, and I just want to release my child's creativity. But they're neglecting something, I think, that's very important.
I remember in your book, Your Future Self Will Thank You, you had a little quote there that I highlighted: the loss of self-control always results in the loss of freedom. And so, and I think that's very true with our kids. We want them to be able to do anything and go anywhere, except if you let a child go anywhere, do anything that they want, they will be dead or in jail before. Right. I'm thinking back to this experiment. And I think if you have multiple kids or you've been around multiple kids, it's pretty obvious that some of them are born with more self-control than others. So I have two questions. Let me start out with one. Do they know why? Like, what is it? Is it a genetic thing? Like, why do some people just naturally have more self-control than others?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one I had going in to research my book. And it was a personal something that was like personally motivating, because growing up, I had a brother that was annoyingly perfect. And I didn't have this kid, honestly, he would, I remember when he was like 7 or 8 years old, he said, I'm not going to eat sugar anymore. And he didn't for like 5 or 6 years, nothing. He'd clean his room every day, and he'd kneel down and pray beside his bed, which of course he had made that morning. I mean, he was just one of those kids, right? Incredibly high self-control, very precocious, very annoying. So you can sympathize with me having to grow up in his shadow, because I wasn't like that. I was to put it mildly, I got arrested for stealing deodorant when I was a teenager. Okay, so weird story. Anyway,
well, you value hygiene. Let's give yourself. good.
Thank you. Exactly. And I came from a family that had deodorant, so I don't know what I was doing. But anyway, that distracted me. Where was I going with this? Okay, so yes, that was one of the first questions that I put to sociologists. I remember talking to one and saying, okay, like, what's going on? I got this perfect brother, Dan. And it's not like he had decades to develop this vital virtue, right? He seemed to just kind of come out with it all figured out. Whereas for me, that wasn't the case. And it was funny because he had a sister that was kind of similar. And so he could sympathize. But what he said is, yeah, some people just have higher levels of self-control. What do you call it? Fixed and state self-control. There are two kinds of self-controls. Like one, talking about how it kind of varies moment to moment. Like we talked about in the last episode, maybe later in the day, your willpower is low because you're tired, you're hungry, whatever the case is. But then people just have these certain levels of self-control, and some are just naturally higher or naturally lower. And he compared it to this. He said, that's true. And it's a little depressing to think that, okay, maybe one of my kids doesn't have a tremendous amount of natural self-control. But look at it this way. Say there's a person who is just an incredible athlete naturally. They never work out. They don't even eat that great, but they can jump through the roof. They can sprint really fast. They got abs. You can look at that and curse that, and that's fine, and I get that. But at the same time, it's not an excuse for you to say, well, I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm not going to work out, right? Because you can improve regardless of where you're at. Like you said at the outset, willpower is like a muscle from a scientific perspective. The more you exercise it, the more it strengthens and grows. And of course, as Christians, to put it into the spiritual language of sanctification, that process lifelong of becoming more and more like Jesus, it's not an instant thing. But thank God, God not only saves us, but he actually changes us.
Yeah.
So that hopefully every year we're looking a little more like Jesus. And of course, self-control is a vital part of that.
So I 100% agree. And as a believer and as an adult, I see the value of self-control and I want it. Like I want more willpower in my life. Let's go back down to these kids with the marshmallows. So I've got this child and her face is stuffed like she's playing Chubby Bunny. And you're telling me that self-control is highly predictable of later outcomes. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, do we get a home near jail so that we can visit on a regular basis? Or is there something that we can do in our children to help them to develop the self-control muscle when they don't yet see the intrinsic value of it?
Right. I'd hold off on getting the house near a jail. Might be a tad premature. You know what? Actually, this is another interesting study. I won't go into the details of it, but that I saw actually after I wrote the book, someone sent me, that they replicated the experiment about marshmallows. But they introduced a significant difference, and that is when the test was administered by a parent or guardian whom the child trusted and loved, they held out longer for the marshmallow. It's interesting, right? So trust and a bond, a connection to the parental figure actually increased their ability to delay gratification, increased their self-control. So it's not a fixed thing. And, as far as what you can do, yes, like I said, prioritizing it in the first place, saying, hey, this is something you want to cultivate. This is something that will enable you to live a life that pleases God, that blesses others, getting that virtue in their head as a good thing to strive towards. And then just in the way you do things, really praising them when they do things that are difficult and they push through that frustration threshold. And what I mean by that, the frustration threshold, right? It's like you're trying something really difficult and a lot of people, just especially children, it's amazing how easily they get frustrated and want to give up. But if you can just kind of push them, not in an abusive, way, but to kind of hold out a little longer, and that muscle, it starts to grow. One silly thing I've been doing with my son during the lockdown, because it's kind of hard for him to get exercise. We're in the rainy Northwest here, and so it's been tough to go outdoors too much. But every day I'm going, hey, let's do our push-ups. And he loves it because, he started at 10 and he could barely knock them out. And then I think we're up to like 20 or something. But it's just like a little challenge. Sounds like a silly thing. And then some days he's lazy, right? He's like, no, I don't want to do it today. My arm's hurting. I'm like, dude, you can do it. Your arm's not that bad. Some people would say that I'm maybe being too harsh or something, or resorting to masculine stereotypes. Sue me. Okay. But I think this kid, man, I'm like, if 20 push-ups is going to kick your butt, I got bad news about the rest of your life.
Right.
You need to develop a little fortitude, a little grit, and push them to do that. And then that's where self-esteem comes from. Self-esteem doesn't come before success. It comes after. When you see that you can push through that frustration threshold, have some success, and they've been memorizing Bible verses, and they got that in their head, their arsenal, and they love that. Those are all hard things to do, but I think they actually boost their self-esteem and, of course, increase their self-control.
Hey, let me tell you about a new podcast that I just launched with a friend of mine. It's called Stories of Hope with Dr. Samuel Thomas. Each week, Dr. Sam and I have about a 15-minute conversation about what God is doing in the nation of India and around the world. You're going to hear about orphans being rescued from extreme poverty, from Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. You're going to hear about churches being planted in villages that have never heard the gospel before. You'll find out the power of a well to change a community. You're going to hear stories of kids who had parents who were killed or parents who were murderers who grow up and become pioneering leaders of the nation of India. If you need some encouragement this year and you want to see what God is doing around the world, check out Stories of Hope with Dr. Sam Thomas. There's a new episode released each Wednesday. It's about 15 minutes. You can find it on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or go to hopegivers.org to find Stories of Hope. If you find it and you like it, I want to encourage you to leave a rating or a review and then share it with a friend that you know has a heart for missions as well. Once again, please take some time, check out my new podcast, Stories of Hope with Dr. Sam Thomas. I've seen that research that talks about how, like, if your child does really good in school, our natural tendency, and especially grandparents want to, but like I want to as well, praise, oh, you're so smart. You did this because you're so smart. And how they say that doing this, like, you're celebrating something that a child has no control over. You have no control over whether you're smart or not. And so, like, I was in the Smart Kid programs, and I kind of saw this sometimes of like, oh, I can do this because I'm smart. I can do this because I'm smart. And then I get to something that I can't do. And it's like, well, I can't do it because I'm not smart enough. Whereas if you can strategically go back and praise your kid, praise your child because, wow, you must have worked really hard to do this, where you're praising their work ethic, you're praising their grit, something they actually have some control over, then you can do that. But I've never, so I know that that's a great strategy. I've never thought of using the word self-control in there as well. But I do know, like, it's the vocabulary that we use with our kids is really important. And so being able to go in and praise their self-control, like, wow, you really, you know what? You didn't go back and try to get a second dessert. I really admire your self-control. I know you had to work hard on that. So do you think that that's a strategy that can kind of play out in multiple scenarios if we learn to even use the word self-control like it's a good thing in our house?
Absolutely. I love that. And honestly, I probably don't do that enough. A little bit.
So if you've done it at all, you're ahead of me. Go ahead.
Right. It's kind of top of mind for me because I wrote a book about it. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have. But you're absolutely right. And I love that about praising kids for things they can control rather than things they can't. Because, also not just when they encounter something that they aren't smart enough for, they might give up, but they might not try as hard because they go, and there have been these fascinating studies contrasting different cultures, especially Asian and white Americans, when it comes to what they attribute success to. The Asian people say it's hard work. American people say it's if you're smart enough, right? And that, I think, again, comes from the self-esteem stuff that we've taught kids. And so we have to just heap praise on everyone for how brilliant they are. And okay, I guess that's all right. But yes, like you said, they don't have a lot of control over that. But if you say, man, I love how you endured, even when you got discouraged, even when you wanted to give up, you kind of kept slugging it out. And I really admire that. And then, this is just basic, B.F. Skinner, behavioral conditioning, right? When kids get praised for certain things, they will try harder in those areas. And so I think that's huge just in the way that we talk about these things. One story I remember reading that book about grit from, what's her name? Angela Duckworth. And she talks in there about how her father, sounds like a good enough father, but he would always say to her, regardless of her, the A's or B's that she got or whatever she accomplished in school, he'd be like, well, you're no genius. It's like a refrain. Okay. I mean, and to my North American ears, I'm like, that monster, right? Like, how dare you? And it's kind of funny because, of course, Angela Duckworth is, big time professor, New York Times bestselling author. She did okay.
Got MacArthur Scholarship, which is the genius grant that they. So her dad wasn't so right.
I would take that genius scholarship and say, Dad, I'm shoving this in your face.
Right. Yeah.
But it's funny. It does raise the question. Was that partially motivated by that? I mean, if her dad would have just bathed her with superlatives her entire childhood about how exquisitely brilliant she was, maybe she wouldn't have been as driven as she was. And listen, you can take it too far, right? If you're withholding approval and being all cold and weird with your kids, you don't want that too. But I think some of us I certainly do, on the other side, where I'm like, anything they do, I'm just like, oh, you're the best. That's amazing. Oh my goodness, you're breathing. Oh, that's great. That's so cool. So sometimes, with not withholding love or affection, but, when they do something that actually kind of stands out as above and beyond, where they did something really difficult, or they stood up to a bully, a bully that was picking on a kid, or something like that, that's really difficult to do, not only difficult, but virtuous, then we really need to praise them to reinforce that behavior.
Yeah. The idea that you can reinforce this across multiple pathways, I think, is really helpful, because I can see it in an academic standpoint. I can see it in a take care of your room. Is there anything like my kids want to fight each other over stupid stuff? Is there any principle that I can take from this that comes to your head? How do I help encourage my children to have even if it's just a little bit more self-control, to not react immediately because, well, he did this? Are there strategies that you can think of that would help in that? Because mine is like threaten with death.
Man, yeah. And yeah, I'll put out the caveat that I'm in the same boat, because our two oldest, that is one of our perennial issues, is the constant fighting. We're like, guys, chill. Like, I mean, and they're 2.5 years apart. And so I get it. It's just, there's competitions for toys and for everything. So it drives us crazy. One thing that we've had a little bit of success in, and that is, forever when they would fight, of course, we give them a consequence. And it's so tough because then they're like, no, it's this person's fault. And no, it's my sister's fault. And you're like, okay, I can't figure out who's to blame here. Okay, you're just both getting no TV today or whatever, and drop a punishment on them or go to your room or whatever. But the thing that we forget to do so often is to, give positive reinforcement for when they don't fight, on those beautiful, rare, blissful days or, hours where they're just playing with each other beautifully and getting along and being kind and sharing. And then you go, you know what, guys? I did this the other day. You guys didn't get in one fight today. You got along so well. You're playing nice. Oh, you're sharing with your sister. I love to see that. We're all going out for some frozen yogurt, which they love, right? And so it's like, oh man, yeah, that's great. And then, next time they're thinking of fighting over something petty, hopefully they'll keep that in mind, that maybe things go better for me when I exercise a little self-control and don't punch my sister in the head.
Yeah. My oldest daughter, who's now 18, I remember when she was in preschool, she had this like Christian ninja preschool teacher who just had control of a class. Like, parents would bring their kids into class and they would be like screaming and frantic and crying. And, she would say to the parents, like, hey, can you hold on a minute? And then she would reach down and hold the child's chin in their hand and look them right in the eye and be like, right now you're going the devil's way. And you need to go the Lord's way, and you need to make that choice. No, I want you to go sit in your chair and get in your self-control position. And they would just like nod their head, stop crying, walk over, get in their desk, and like sit down, put their arms together and lay their head down. And that was their self-control position. So there's a bunch of things in that one statement that I would love to be able to do. But I think one of the ones that could be helpful is that like the physical posture, like teaching your children a self-control position. Things are chaos, things are wild. And so instead of just like, sit down, shut up, all of this stuff, if we can train them and reward them and like, hey, let's get in our self-control position, and it be the kind of position that is useful wherever they are. So like if you're out to eat at the dinner table, if you're with friends or whatever, and also one maybe to coach them on if their emotions are getting out of control with their siblings, and be like, okay, we need to get in our self-control position. And so it physically gives them something to concentrate on as they try to decompress some. How do you think physical and mental, how can you play those off one another in trying to train your kids?
I love that. I'm going to use that. Because kids they need tangible things, right? We all do, but probably kids even more. And so a position where they're kind of calming down and kind of reinforces that need to exercise self-control, especially if they're upset or having some really big emotions. I think of my daughter, Mary. My wife introduced this. I think she read about it online. But there's this thing called a calming jar, and it's just like a little jar full of water with these like sprinkles that float in it or something. And and I was like, this isn't going to work. This is obviously hokey. But she gives it to her when she's really upset. And you're like, okay, I can see her upset. Why don't you grab your calming jar, kind of look at it for a while and shake it and stuff like that. And then, Mary will get upset even now. And this has been, a couple of years. And she'll be like, I need my calming jar, and get the calming jar, and it works. I mean, it's obviously a little trick, right? The calming jar isn't exerting any magical power, but it's just like almost like a posture or a practice, something tangible she can do that kind of breaks the cycle of anger or sadness. And so things like that with kids, and those are just things I'd never even think of, as an adult. I don't think a calming jar is going to work for me. Maybe I should try it. But
you remember those bobs, those little rubbery stress guys that they would that used to be all the rage, that like you could squeeze it and like squeeze that bob face and it'll come back.
Instead of punching your boss, you squeeze Bob. Yeah.
The adult version of the calming jar. So, okay, I'm trying to like take everything we said and distill it down. If I'm a parent listening, and number one, I could just listen to Jay and Drew talk forever, so I forget the fact that I'm trying to learn something here. But now all of a sudden the podcast is nearly over, and I want to like take something out. Incorporating the language of self-control. Like, how do I help develop self-control in my kids? One is to actually use that language and to praise them for it. I think is a really good thing. I liked what you said about doing the things with them and encouraging, like you did the push-ups. So like do actions of self-control with them, so that self-control isn't just a punishment, like that they see the end towards it. Talking to them about the benefits of it. And there's a lot of ways you could do that. I think like, with your sons, you talk about, professional athletes, and just like, oh man, you look at the way they made that catch. Now, obviously there's a lot of athleticism there, but how many times do you think he practiced that single movement to be able to do that? And what a lot of self-control he must have shown. What a lot of denial of going out and partying, eating pizza and everything else to do that. So and with ladies, whether it's gymnastics or ballet or all of these things, there's conversations that you can have with it. Getting involved with the physical elements. So like learning a self-control position. So one of those could just be like, kind of sitting in a chair with your arms folded. There's another one, by the way. I have a special needs daughter, and one of the ones that they taught in sensory processing, they call it a strong sit, where it's sitting with your legs crossed, like left over right. And I can't, like, this is a audio podcast, so I'll show you, Drew. And putting her hands in front of her, crisscrossing them over, and then folding them up kind of backwards there. And practicing almost like a yogi kind of sit, where you're cross-legged and you're sitting kind of with your arms folded, crossed-armed. And there's something about that, they said, that crosses the left brain, right brain barrier and produces the ability to calm yourself and have self-control. And then the calming jar, the kind of like a physical, tangible stress thing. So there are a number of strategies that we can use. And then I'm going to let you speak to desperate prayer before the Lord. So how are we going to bring God into this lifelong marathon of trying to develop this in our kids?
Yes. Well, no, those are great things. I'd add one more too that came to mind that we've been doing during this whole pandemic is keeping a family schedule.
Okay.
And so we get, big piece of cardboard or whatever, put it on the wall somewhere prominent, especially because we're doing the homeschooling. It's like, okay, from 9 to 10, we're doing this, from 11 to 12. And kids, as you know, they're rule junkies. They love to have something to go, okay, oh, that's what we're doing. Okay, well, no, you have to sit down and work now because look at the schedule, right? So they have deference to a schedule, not all the time, but that has worked wonders as well. And I think that kind of goes back to what we discussed with habits. And what you're essentially doing is setting up these systems in place for them to develop these good habits, which will, of course, help them in the area of self-control.
Yeah, because your schedule feels out of control. Like you have no idea what's coming. Like you're taking some of your willpower, just living in anticipation of what's next. So yeah, that's really good. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. But
absolutely true. No, that's exactly right. They want to know where the boundaries are, what the schedule is, what's going to be coming next. You're absolutely right. And then also to have a little grace for your kids and for yourself, because this is a crazy time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're still in this whole pandemic. Our lives have been upended, disrupted. All the behaviors that maybe enabled you to blow off steam, going to the mall, or talking to coworkers, or going to the movies, whatever it is, have been taken away, and it's a big drain on your willpower, on your self-control. So, and yeah, you're probably feeling guilty. I am. Too much screen time for the kids. Oh man. But at the end of the day, cut yourself some slack. These are hard times. This is hard stuff. Under the best conditions, parenting is murder. Okay. It's tough. And so you throw in all these other things, cut yourself some slack, spend time in the Word and in prayer, especially with your family as much as possible. And God will carry you.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, would you close this in praying for the moms and dads listening that God would just give them some favor and grace on this subject?
Absolutely. Dear Lord, I thank you for this conversation. It's been a lot of fun. And we are so grateful to you that you adopted us as your children. And not only that, you've chosen to give us children. You've given us the honor, the privilege, the high calling of raising these precious little ones that you've entrusted to our care. I pray that you would help us to do it well. Give us discernment. There's so many tough calls every day about how to respond, what to do. Give us patience as we guide and love our children. And I pray for each one of the listeners and each one of their children that they would grow up to be men and women who honor and love and serve you and become a blessing not only to their families, but to the world. And I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Drew, it's been a pleasure. I hope this isn't the last time I have you on. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Let's do it again. I appreciate it.
Friend, if you're still listening all the way to the credits, then I hope that means that this was a particular blessing to you to hear this podcast. If so, I want to encourage you to share it with somebody else that you think might be helped by it. You're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find out more information about show notes, about past issues, all kinds of things to help your family. And I do want to say that Let's Parent on Purpose is a user-supported podcast. And if you would like to be a part of that, you can go to letsparentonpurpose.com, learn how to be a supporter through Patreon or through a one-time gift. Thank you so much for listening. Again, share this with somebody that you know needs to hear it. Remember that parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. And we'll talk to you soon.